Heartwarming moment at airport. Single dad reveals the power of sign language to a deaf CEO's mom. Jake stood in the crowded bustle of O'Hare Airport, his mind a storm of anxiety. He was there with Lily, his spirited 8-year-old daughter, whose bright eyes sparkled with boundless energy and curiosity. But the beauty of this moment was marred by the gnawing weight of his professional life pressing down on him like an oppressive cloak. Just days ago, the design firm he had devoted his heart to was acquired by a larger company, and now the looming meeting threatened to unravel his already fragile peace. He breathed in deeply, reminding himself of the laughter they shared each morning in their cozy apartment, where sign language became their bridge to joy and connection. Lily's glee was infectious as she tried to mimic the planes taking off, her hands moving in exaggerated swoops. "Look, Daddy!" She beamed, her laughter brightening the dreary gray of the terminal. Heart swelling with pride, Jake couldn't help but smile. Yet as the minutes passed, that fleeting happiness slipped, replaced with an ache of worry. Would his new employers see the value in his creative ideas or dismiss him as just another cog in their corporate machine? The balance of his life felt precarious, as if a faint gust could topple it all. Before he could spiral too deeply into his thoughts, a finely dressed woman emerged from the crowd, radiating an air of privilege. Evelyn, the CEO's mother, blocked their path. Her initial glance at Jake was one of slight confusion, then judgment, as her eyes flicked to Lily, who was busy dancing in excitement. "Is she?" The unfinished question hung in the air, laden with the stigma and misunderstanding that Jake knew all too well. The tension in Jake's stomach tightened. Here was a moment where he could either retreat into bitterness or stand tall for what he believed. Taking a breath, he revealed the beauty of Lily's life, the vibrance, the creativity, the way she made the world a brighter place every day, despite the obstacles. Evelyn's expression shifted as she listened, blinking back a veil of ignorance that had long clouded her view. "She's incredible," Evelyn said, her tone softening before she faltered, haunted by her own past discomforts with disabilities that clashed violently against her polished existence. Before they could navigate the growing connection between them, Jake's phone buzzed in his pocket, a reminder of the meeting that loomed ominously ahead. "Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen." Now let's continue. As the moment of revelation passed, Jake saw in Evelyn's eyes that same conflict he bore, an unease, swirling just beneath the surface. They stared at one another, bridge builders on opposite sides of a great divide. Just as Jake felt them inching closer to an understanding, Evelyn's phone rang, a shrill contrast to the warmth of their dialogue. Her face shifted, a reminder of the distance that still lay between them. The connection frayed, snapping under the strain of expectations and worlds apart. Jake stood frozen, heart racing, trapped in this liminal space, wondering if they would slip back into silence and if he would find the strength to push forward in his journey, both as a father and a professional. As the tension in the air grew thick, Jake felt the unmistakable weight of time pressing against him. The meeting was imminent, and yet, standing before Evelyn, he sensed an opportunity to forge a new path, not just for himself, but for Lily and others like her. The unspoken bond between them lingered, transformed from judgment to potential understanding, but would it hold or shatter under the corporate pecking order? "Can I ask you something?" Evelyn's voice was cautious, revealing a glimmer of her past struggles beneath her polished surface. Jake nodded, sensing her openness may be the crack that allowed for a deeper dialogue. "How do you navigate the corporate world as a single father? Does it ever feel like you're fighting an uphill battle?" The vulnerability in her question struck a chord. Jake took a moment to collect his thoughts, thinking of all the times he felt he had to prove himself, not just as a designer, but as a father who refused to let stigma dictate his daughter's worth. "Every day, I have to choose between fear and advocacy. Fear says I shouldn't stand out, advocacy pushes me to ensure Lily's voice is heard. There's a fine line between blending in and striving for visibility, he replied, his sincerity evoking an unguarded look from Evelyn. The awareness that crackled between them sparked a flicker of hope. This could be the moment he needed to solidify his standing in this new company. But alongside that was the creeping worry about how much of himself he could still share without risking judgment. Evelyn, processing his words, seemed to reconsider her perspective. I think the world needs more people like you who challenge assumptions. I admit, I've struggled with my own biases. She paused, her gaze shifting to Lily, who was now engrossed in a game with her imaginary airplanes. She reminds me of the pure joy in pursuing what makes us human, she added, her voice thick with emotion. The conversation shifted momentum sharply, filling Jake with a sense of determination. Perhaps this wasn't solely about the meeting that lay ahead, but rather a greater chance to influence not just Evelyn's views but maybe even the wider corporate culture, reshaping it for inclusivity. Was he ready and capable of becoming that advocate? Just as he prepared to articulate his thoughts, echoing the stark contrasts he faced as a father and a creative, Evelyn's phone intercepted the moment again. For a fleeting second, the air felt heavy with dread. The world closed back in around them, and Jake instinctively braced for the disconnect that was sure to follow. Sorry, I have to take this, she said, glancing at the screen and shifting away, already stepping back into her corporate armor. The rich connection they forged moments before felt like a lost opportunity as she answered, leaving Jake alone with Lily, who sensed the change immediately, her smile fading that he knelt beside her, drawing her into a hug, flooded with the lingering anxiety about the meeting and heartache over the fragmented connection with Evelyn. Hey, kiddo, remember what we talked about? It's about sharing our story, he whispered, trying to invoke the spirit of resilience that swirled within them. Are we still going to be okay? Lily signed, her eyes wide and searching. Jake swallowed hard, vowing not only to reassure her but to find the courage within to navigate this labyrinth of corporate expectations. The tension mounted, fueled by the unresolved conversation that lingered. He didn't just want to be a designer but a catalyst for change. As they stood up, interlocked, Jake turned his gaze toward the conference room ahead, infused with a new spirit. He was ready to face whatever was coming, both personally and professionally. Were the powers of understanding and vulnerability enough to carve a space for Lily and others like her in an unforgiving landscape? The moment had arrived to confront what lay beyond the glass doors. Would he connect the dots in this new chapter of his life, or would he be dismissed once again? The glass doors loomed before Jake like the threshold between his present fears and the future he dared to envision, one where voices like Lily's could be heard and embraced. Taking a deep breath, he felt the adrenaline surge through him. He tightened his hold on Lily's small hand, reminding himself that he was not alone in this journey, even if the corporate world often felt isolating. Inside, a sense of gravity weighed down on him. The room echoed with quiet conversations, and the hum of anticipation was palpable. Jake's heart raced as he caught sight of the people who would dictate his path forward: executives, peers, and perhaps, contenders. The stakes felt impossibly high, but the image of Lily's bright eyes inspired him to push past the fear choking him. As the meeting commenced, Jake observed the dynamics of the room. Leaders perched on their chairs, exchanging glances, a mix of assertiveness and apprehension. Evelyn took her place among them, composed and polished, yet Jake felt the lingering thread of their earlier exchange as he silently willed her to remember the vulnerability they had shared. It was a thread he could pull on, one that could lead to change. The agenda moved swiftly, but Jake's mind was preoccupied. When it came time for him to present his design concepts, confidence ballooned within him. As he stepped forward, his heart racing with every beat, he remembered Evelyn's words about challenging assumptions. He had managed to interweave elements of inclusivity within his designs. Not just about aesthetics, but about accessibility and representation. Good morning, everyone, Jake began, his voice somewhat steadier than he felt. Today, I'd like to focus on how our designs can advocate for those who have often been sidelined. As a father to Lily, who is deaf, I see how crucial it is for every voice, every story to find its place within our products. He paused, catching Evelyn's eye. A split second of connection ignited the flicker of warmth he sensed between them. With each slide, he illustrated his vision, blending emotional narratives with practical applications. He spoke to the importance of making spaces where children and adults alike could interact with their environment, assured that they matter. He felt a surge as he realized he was no longer just a solo voice, he was weaving in layers of others' experiences: Lily's laughter, the child's yearning for acceptance, the family's pride in embracing difference. After his presentation, the room erupted with discussions. Questions flew at him, not just about the designs but about the deeper implications behind them. Jake answered with an openness he hadn't expected. Perhaps it was Evelyn's earlier question that lingered, spurring him to share the challenges he faced in the world of parenting as well as professional life, yet, amidst the dialogue, he observed the glimmer of skepticism in some eyes. Would they champion change or retreat to their comfort zones? He felt a pang of doubt, a familiar weight in his chest. Despite everything, his fear of judgment surged back like a tidal wave, striving to drown out the voice of advocacy. Why should we cater to designs that focus on disability? An executive challenged. Wouldn't that alienate our primary market? Jake's pulse quickened, he was teetering on the precipice of his own potential. Only if we view it that way, he replied. By embracing inclusive design, we don't distance ourselves, we broaden our audience, making them feel valued, even represented. Think about the impact we could make. An eternal second passed, filled with the silent tension of perception and judgment. As the meeting wore on, Jake felt a trickle of resolve shooting through him. He caught Evelyn's encouraging nod across the table and reaffirmed his position. No matter the outcome, he was ready to embrace the winds of change, ready to fight for himself, for Lily, for voices that sought amplification in a system designed to minimize them. But then a startling thought sent a shiver along his spine. What if this was just the beginning of a conflict that would change everything? The meeting was moving forward, but uncertainty loomed over Jake. Would he emerge as a leader, or would he falter under the weight of their expectations? As he steadied his breath, the answer was more crucial than the final verdict of the meeting, for how he chose to navigate these waters might shape the course of not only his career but his very identity as an advocate. Would he find the strength to hold his ground in a sea of skepticism? Or was he destined to be submerged? All eyes were on him now, and his moment had finally arrived. As the meeting concluded, Jake sensed a shift in the atmosphere. Discussions lingered, analysts furiously typing notes, while he was enveloped in buzzing uncertainty. Had he made an impact, or had his efforts been swallowed by the corporate machine? The room's skepticism rattled like a loose tooth in his mouth, and he fought against the nerves that were threatening to grip him anew. Evelyn approached him after the meeting's conclusion, her expression reflective, as if weighing the substance of their earlier conversations. You did well, she acknowledged, yet her voice carried a hint of caution. But the real work starts now. Your ideas are just as vulnerable to dismissal as any other. Jake felt her words sink deeply, echoing the very doubts he had tried to suppress. I was hoping for a little more enthusiasm, he replied, masking a tremor of disappointment. I really believed I could challenge their perspective. Belief isn't enough. Her gaze sharpened, and the boundaries of their earlier warmth shifted into a more pragmatic exchange. It's about strategy now. You need allies, viewpoints that are aligned with yours. If you want this to resonate, you have to learn how to navigate the politics. Jake cursed himself for not thinking beyond just the presentation. How naive it felt in retrospect. He had stepped so boldly into the room, armed with passion and a sense of purpose, but Evelyn's words shimmered with a painful clarity. He needed to build connections. Suddenly, the starkness of the corporate landscape unfurled before him, sprawling with both challenge and opportunity. Who can be your advocate? Evelyn continued, her tone shifting into one of mentorship that was both unsettling and invigorating. You need to approach them and engage. Your ideas are strong, don't miss the chance to form a coalition. Jake nodded, her challenge igniting a flicker of determination. The entrepreneurs sitting across from him were largely untouchable, yet their skepticism was not insurmountable. Who among them had families? Who could empathize with his story? He put names to faces, attached narratives to those cold executives. He dehumanized the entire endeavor. As he walked the hallways after the meeting, his mind reeled with possible connections. Each door he passed felt like it could swing open a new conversation, a new ally. He couldn't let the moment fade into memory. He mentally listed peers who had expressed interest in inclusive design, some whose glances during the meeting had hinted at curiosities rather than contempt. That evening, Jake returned home stewing with resolve. He sat beside Lily at the dining table, arms resting against the table's edge as they colored together. "Lily, guess what?" he said, lifting her chin to meet her sparkling, trusting eyes. "I'm going to help so many kids like you, kids who deserve to see themselves represented." Her small hands paused, colored pencil still in her grip. "Really, Daddy? Really? I'm going to talk to more people about what you and I know, the importance of making sure everyone feels included." Her smile widened, igniting a fire within him that was both warming and strengthening. She didn't fully understand the corporate complexities, but her belief in him propelled him further. If he could conjure the strength to navigate the maze of voices, he could create change, but the realization struck him. Evelyn's caution resonated. The art of persuasion and negotiation was foreign territory. Would his emotions serve him, or would they expose him? He had to evolve, not only as a father and advocate but as a tactician in the intricate web of corporate interactions. With a steely resolve to rise above his doubts, he contemplated the mounting tension. He needed to forge those critical connections and hone his approach. The clock was ticking, and opportunity wouldn't wait for him to find his footing. The path was not defined yet, but the call to action was loud and undeniable. As Jake gathered a list of people, mentally preparing his moves, an unsettling thought pushed against his resolve. What if he failed to connect with them? What if he lost Lily's dream before it even began to manifest? He shook the thoughts away. There would be no losing. He had come too far and had too much to gain. A sense of urgency surged within him as he firmly gripped the pencil beside Lily and began sketching ideas together, but shadows danced in the corners of his mind as he realized the true battle was just beginning. Whether he could emerge victorious, it felt increasingly clear. His journey as an advocate was tethered tightly to the unfolding challenges before him. The confrontation with self-doubt and the potential for failure loomed ever larger. Little did he know, a deeper test awaited on the horizon. The following day dawned overcast, reflecting Jake's turbulent thoughts. As he reviewed the contacts he had compiled, one name emerged conspicuously from the fog of uncertainty: Marcus Hale, the head of operations. Marcus was known for advocating innovation that touched the lives of underrepresented communities, and he had recently initiated programs focused on inclusivity. They had met briefly at a company function, and although the encounter had been cursory, it served as a reminder that not all hope was lost. "I need to speak to him," Jake muttered, a hint of determination igniting at his core. He spent the morning drafting an email that balanced professionalism with authenticity, expressing his desire to discuss inclusion strategy in a way that resonated with Marcus's own initiatives. Each sentence became more than mere words. They were the culmination of his anxiety, hope, and ambition. But the moment of hitting send loomed ominously. Anxiety fluttered in his stomach as he wrestled with the familiar shadow of self-doubt. Did he present himself confidently enough? Would Marcus dismiss him again? He pressed the button and felt a rush of adrenaline wash over him. Hours passed. Each tick of the clock heightened his anticipation, but also the gnawing fear of silence. Was he destined to remain unheard again? Yet, when his phone lit up with a reply, he felt a thrill surge through him. "I'd like to meet for coffee tomorrow. Let's discuss," the message read. As Jake mulled over the prospect of meeting, he felt a mix of relief and trepidation. How would he frame his argument? He needed to showcase not only the merit of his ideas but also their potential economic viability. This would be more than a chat, it was a high-stakes negotiation. The next day, sunlight streamed through the cafe window as he arrived early, heart racing with excitement and anxiety. He scanned the room, observing the subtle rhythms of morning bustle, each sip of coffee echoing an unspoken promise of progress. Just as he began to settle into the cadence of his thoughts, Marcus appeared, his presence both authoritative and approachable. "Jake, right?" Marcus greeted, extending a hand. they exchanged pleasantries as they settled at a small corner table. Jake felt the momentum shifting. His nerves receded to the background as he began to articulate his vision for inclusivity within the company, weaving in Lily's story to humanize his points, but as he spoke, an unexpected undercurrent of self-questioning began to surface. Was this just a performance aimed at charm, or did he truly believe in the impact of his initiatives? The challenge melded with a realization: he was not merely presenting statistics, he was illuminating a cause grounded in his essence. Marcus listened intently, often nodding in thoughtful consideration. However, he started pushing back gently, questioning Jake's assumptions and demanding more concrete plans. With each probing question, doubts crept back in. Could he withstand this critical scrutiny? Here's the deal, Jake, the market demands measurable outcomes. What metrics can you provide? Marcus's steady gaze was piercing. In that moment, Jake felt the weight of his aspirations colliding with the harshness of corporate realities. He recognized that he needed to adapt quickly to pivot from a visionary talker to a strategic thinker. He hadn't prepared for these tough inquiries, and it was disorienting. I need to figure that out, Jake admitted, the vulnerability washing over him. I have strong ideas, but I'll need to refine them into a quantifiable format. Marcus opened up. That honesty is refreshing. Everyone's eager to perform, it's rare to hear someone admit where they still need to grow. We talk metrics in my department. Do you think you can come up with a plan to bridge that gap? Jake's heart surged. This moment was more than a challenge, it was an invitation to evolve. In that realization, a new urgency compelled him forward. He left that meeting with a sense of purpose, absorbed in thoughts of metrics, outreach, and engagement strategies. The corporate machine, once an intimidating fortress, began to feel like a maze he could navigate. He was no longer just an emotional advocate, but a tactical player poised to craft change through both passion and practicality. The knowledge that he had a way into the system invigorated him, but fresh anxieties persisted. Just as he settled into this newfound understanding, a late-night email buzzed on his phone with a familiar name, Evelyn. Let's chat. I have some concerns regarding your direction. The message carried a weight that felt heavier than before, the fragility of his progress suddenly laid bare. Did she sense his wavering confidence? Would her insight keep him on track or threaten his momentum? As he stared at the screen, the question resonated in his mind: was he ready for the scrutiny she would bring, or had he only scratched the surface of his potential? Jake sat on the edge of his bed, his laptop open but untouched, the dim light of the room amplifying the tension in his chest. Evelyn's email lingered in his thoughts like an uninvited shadow. Despite the surge of confidence he had after meeting Marcus, the weight of his insecurities felt palpable. What if Evelyn saw straight through the surface, saw his lack of solid metrics and plans? What if her feedback was a harsh awakening to the reality that he was not yet ready for this role? He forced himself to take a deep breath, trying to quell the rising tide of anxiety. The ground was shifting beneath him, and he needed to stabilize his footing before meeting Evelyn. Planning was necessary, but it was entirely possible that her concerns stemmed from a place of mentorship rather than malice. With that in mind, he opened a new document, its blankness an empty canvas onto which he could project his ideas. What metrics do I need? He asked himself, glaring persistently at the cursor blinking in response. Jake began outlining what he had gleaned from his conversation with Marcus. He formulated broad categories: outreach, engagement, and impact assessment, each with its own potential metrics. Could he quantify the community engagement he envisioned? Could he measure success through participation rates or feedback loops? He found himself engrossed in the task, each point reshaping notions he had previously accepted as fixed. Ideas flowed more freely once he embraced the reality that this work was for more than just himself. This was about igniting change and making systems more inclusive. The concepts took shape, unveiling strategies that were not only plausible but essential. As the hours trickled away, a sense of empowerment settled in, counteracting the nagging self-doubt. The daunting meeting with Evelyn transformed into an opportunity for a collaborative exchange. The disparity in their positions began to feel less like a chasm and more like a foundation for shared growth. He was ready to face her, equipped with thoughts that held weight, compassionate yet grounded in strategy. Later that evening, Jake composed his response, accepting her invitation but proposing a clear agenda. He outlined the new plan he had created, sprinkling in notes about metrics he could research to bolster his initial ideas. The act of sending the email was liberating. He was no longer playing defense, but actively inviting counsel. The next day arrived too soon, Jake's heart racing as he approached Evelyn's office. The walk felt like a peculiar journey into unknown territory, each step both a threat and a promise. He knocked softly, and when she answered, her expression was neutral, concealing the intensity of her thoughts. "Come in, Jake," she said, gesturing for him to sit. "Thanks for taking the time to meet," he began, his voice steady despite the fluttering nerves. "I've rethought some of the ideas we discussed, and I've put together a plan outlining potential metrics to evaluate our initiatives." Evelyn raised her eyebrows, a hint of intrigue flashing across her face. "I see you've taken the feedback seriously. Let us hear what you've come up with." As he presented his refined concepts, a wave of confidence surged through him. He watched her response closely. Was that a note of approval he detected? When he finished, Evelyn leaned back, her fingers steepled thoughtfully. "It's a solid start, Jake. However, we need to dig deeper into how these metrics translate into real impact. Think about the stories behind the numbers." Her encouragement sent a ripple of relief through him, yet the pressure remained. He had landed on a plateau of knowledge, but higher peaks loomed just ahead. "What you said about stories speaks to me," Jake replied, energy coursing through his voice. "I want to ensure that qualitative outcomes are just as valued. The human element can't be left out." "Exactly," she nodded, her gaze sharp. "Metrics aren't just data points, they're reflections of the lives we're trying to influence. Let us work on integrating the personal narratives with your quantifiable elements." The resonating truth in her words ignited a new spark within him. Their conversation shifted into collaborative territory where they began brainstorming together, the dynamic transforming from one reviewer to an engaged partner willing to challenge and be challenged. As they finished their discussion, Jake walked out with a renewed sense of purpose. He now understood that he wasn't merely a cog in the machine but part of a larger engine of change, poised to drive forward in the corporate landscape. But before he could fully embrace this revelation, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from Marcus. "I'd like to discuss your plan in detail next week. Bring what you've gathered." Suddenly, an undercurrent of uncertainty swept over him once more. Had he truly prepared enough for the scrutiny that would face him, now multiplied by first-hand oversight? He paused, a deep breath escaping his lips. The stakes had risen, but so had his resolve. Could he synthesize these newfound insights into a cohesive strategy that could withstand rigorous inquiry? Jake's horizon expanded before him, both thrilling and daunting, as the moment loomed for him to fully embrace his potential. Jake spent the following days meticulously refining his strategy, his mind a whirlwind of ambition stitched with threads of anxiety. Armed with Evelyn's insights, he dissected each aspect of his metrics. The stories behind the numbers became his focal point, and he dedicated hours to interviewing stakeholders, gathering qualitative data, and documenting experiences that illustrated the impact of their initiatives. Yet, amidst the hustle, a haunting question nagged him: what if he faltered when it mattered most? The looming conversation with Marcus hung heavy, an invisible weight that quickened his pulse. Every time he sat down to review his notes, the specter of inadequacy circled in his mind, whispering that his efforts might not be enough. As he walked into the office on the day of the meeting, the polished floors beneath him gleamed ominously. The environment buzzed with the energy of busy professionals, but to Jake, it felt like a maze designed to amplify his insecurities. Breathing deeply, he approached Marcus's office, rehearsing the narrative he had composed, a blend of metrics and personal stories that illustrated the community's challenges and triumphs. Knocking on the door, he heard Marcus's strong voice invite him in. As he entered, Jake was met with a warm but assessing smile. "Jake, great to see you. I'm eager to hear about what you've been working on." Jake swallowed hard, nerves rising again, but he pressed forward, laying out his plan methodically. He talked about community outreach metrics, engagement statistics, and, critically, the personal narratives that demonstrated real impact. The presentation flowed more smoothly than he had anticipated, perhaps aided by a flicker of realization. He was genuinely passionate about this work. Marcus listened intently, interjecting with thoughtful questions that pushed Jake to explore deeper. You mentioned participant feedback a few times. How do you ensure their voices are truly represented in your metrics? That question caught Jake off guard, an elemental challenge that stripped away his rehearsed security. He took a moment, grappling with the reality that he needed to acknowledge the complexity of his endeavor. I believe it's essential to create a feedback loop where participants can voice their stories throughout the process. It's not just about collecting data, it's about genuine engagement. We want to empower them to see their own reflections in our outcomes. A pleased smile crept onto Marcus's face, his eyes sparkling with admiration. That's it. Engaging them from the start will yield richer insights and strengthen trust. But how do we scale that idea? Jake's mind raced, drawing connections and crafting new pathways. This was not simply a presentation anymore, it had transformed into a brainstorming session, a collaborative dialogue that challenged him to think dynamically and strategically. They engaged in a back and forth, ideas bouncing between them like a vibrant tennis match. By the time the meeting wrapped up, Jake felt waves of exhilaration course through him. His plan had not just been validated, it had evolved. Yet, beneath that excitement lay a flicker of doubt, a nagging feeling that he could still lose traction amid the momentum he had built. As he exited Marcus's office, Jake's phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't just a casual text, it was a calendar invitation for a follow-up meeting. In the subject line, Marcus had simply written, "Next steps." The dizzying thrill of progress intertwined with a creeping uncertainty about whether he could turn these initial victories into sustained success. Jake was perched on the cusp of something potentially transformative, but with growth came the risk of stumbles. Caught between anticipation and fear of failure, he turned to his desk, torn between the desire to bask in this moment of validation and a haunted worry about what awaited him down this newly paved pathway. Could he truly maintain this upward momentum, or was he merely one misstep away from falling back into familiar limitations? As he prepared for the next chapter, he understood one crucial truth: he was no longer just a passenger in this journey, he was in the driver's seat, and the road ahead was uncharted. What lay ahead was unknown, but it would soon demand every ounce of courage he possessed. In the days that followed the exhilarating meeting with Marcus, Jake found himself oscillating between heightened motivation and gnawing apprehension. With each passing hours, the daunting prospect of the follow-up meeting loomed ahead like a storm on the horizon, bringing mixed emotions that clashed within him. Jake immersed himself in further analysis, dissecting not only his strategy but also his own thoughts and feelings. Every time he visualized that next steps meeting, a knot tightened in his stomach. How to evolve not only his plan but himself was the constant puzzle. The stakes had transformed from mere job performance to personal growth, and with every piece of feedback he received, he felt as if he was peeling back layers of his own hesitations. For the first time, Jake began experimenting with his own public presentations outside of work. He joined a local Toastmasters club, initially feeling like an imposter among a group of seasoned speakers. Standing before the group, he stumbled through his opening lines, grappling with nervousness that threatened to silence him. Yet, there was a spark of rebellion within. As he spoke, he saw the glimmers of understanding in their eyes, and that encouraged him to forge ahead. Each meeting challenged him to break through his private self-doubt, shifting from the anxious analyst to a more confident communicator, punctuating his points with newfound passion. However, familiar insecurities rerouted his progress. Each time he returned home from a session, Jake faced his reflection in the darkened window, the question whispering cruelly, "Are you really cut out for this?" Those moments were delicate balances of motivation and self-derision, where the same ambition that drove him to practice could also wage a war against his confidence. As the next meeting date approached, Jake meticulously reviewed every detail. He infused personal anecdotes from his experiences at Toastmasters into his presentation, aiming to showcase not only data but the genuine enthusiasm he had begun to feel. This was more than just a professional task, it was about acknowledging his growth and reshaping his self-image. The day of the meeting arrived, and Jake entered the conference room armed with his refined strategy. As he looked around the table, a mix of familiar faces and new ones greeted him. Marcus flashed a reassuring smile, beckoning Jake to begin. With a deep breath, he set aside the anxiety that had haunted him in previous meetings. This wasn't simply a performance in front of peers, it was an opportunity to invite them into his journey, not just as metrics but as vibrant stories pulsing beneath the surface. He spoke with conviction, emphasizing the collaborative strategies he developed to ensure participant feedback was not only collected but cradled into their processes. Each idea was expressed with an urgency that reminded him of those late-night Toastmasters practices. This was his moment to shine. The conversation turned rich, unfolding with the excitement of those brainstorming sessions after his first meeting with Marcus. But as he relayed his ideas, a sudden sense of awareness surged upon him. It wasn't merely the pitch that was captivating, it was the alliance he sensed forming within the room. Just as he sensed a shift toward agreement, a dissenting voice emerged. A new stakeholder, someone he had not engaged with before, challenged his approach, pointing out potential gaps in his strategy. Jake felt his heart race as the confrontation brought him back to that moment of doubt he had feared. It was a pivotal point, not only in this meeting but within himself. Somewhere inside, a fire ignited. He realized that the fear of failure was not a limitation, it could be fuel. "You're right," he responded, tapping into the resilience he had forged through his practice. "Let us address those gaps together." As the meeting unfolded, Jake felt an unfamiliar certainty blooming within him. This was no longer a moment of potential failure but an invitation to collaborate, to challenge and be challenged. By the end, he knew he had crossed a line not just in the meeting, but within his own identity. His ability to embrace vulnerability had transformed into a source of strength, forging a stronger connection with his colleagues. As he gathered his materials to leave the meeting room, Jake couldn't shake the intense query that crept in again. He was changing, for sure, but was he ready for the inevitable challenges that came with this new evolution? He stepped into the hallway, heart racing, embracing the pulse of uncertainty that came with transformation. The real test awaited him. It was time to navigate the unknown of his newly defined role. The path could easily twist into chaos, and he was prepared to face it head-on, yet the reminder loomed: this journey was about to demand far more than he ever thought possible. As Jake navigated the echoing halls of the office, a whirlpool of thoughts churned within him. He had faced doubts and emerged with a semblance of confidence, yet beneath the surface, the questions persisted: was it enough? Would this newfound collaboration earn him the respect he craved, or would it expose him as a fraud? The days that followed the meeting were a simmering pot of revelations. Jake dove deeper into his work, finding himself at a crossroads between strategic dictates and an emerging vision rooted in empathy. He observed his colleagues closely, not just as co-workers but as individuals with aspirations and motivations. This shift in perspective opened a window to potential partnerships he had not previously considered, and for the first time, he felt a sense of social responsibility. He was in a position not only to lead but to uplift. Motivated by this new awareness, Jake sought guidance from past mentors and peers, reaching out to those he had previously viewed as intimidating. The act of vulnerability became his ally. Each conversation carved pathways into his layers of self-doubt, reinforcing the idea that input was not an indicator of inadequacy but a vehicle for growth. He recalled the thrill of collaboration during the previous meeting, the exhilaration coursing through him as he embraced challenges rather than recoiled from them, yet, old habits hung like shadows at the edges of his progress. When faced with yet another team review that demanded bold innovation, Jake felt a flicker of trepidation. He found himself slipping back into calculations of risk and fear instead of casting a vision that could inspire. This was no ordinary presentation, it was an opportunity to not only present a project but to reveal his journey. Recognition surfaced. Confidence was not merely a product of achievement, but a chronicled narrative of his evolution. Eager to embody this realization, Jake crafted a presentation built on shared experiences rather than statistics. He sought to illustrate tangible lessons, wielding anecdotes that resonated with human experience. Among them, he included moments from his Toastmasters journey that illuminated the connection he was striving to build with his team, like a window into his growth rather than a polished facade. The narrative of transformation became synonymous with his strategy. Just as Jake finalized his preparation, a colleague, Hannah, approached him, her brow furrowed. She possessed a compass of intuition that often recognized vacillations in others, and he admired her ability to navigate office dynamics deftly. "Are you ready for the meeting?" she asked. Jake hesitated, contemplating the weight of vulnerability he planned to expose. "Ready?" he mirrored, almost defensively. "I'm trying something different this time." The uncertainty reflected in his voice searched for an anchor. "Different in a good way, I hope. Just don't lose sight of your own voice in the process. They are listening to you, not just your project," she advised, an undertone of sincerity illuminating her words. Their interaction lingered with him as the hour drew near. The very notion of losing his voice had haunted him, battling between the fear of judgment and the desire to choreograph a narrative that felt authentic. The conference room was packed when he entered, eyes weighing on him as he stood at the forefront. He took a moment to inhale deeply, centering himself. Driven by ambition but tethered by humanity, Jake recognized that in this moment, he could be both leader and learner. As he confidently launched into his story, he noticed subtle nods of alignment from the audience. Each point, shaped by experience, began to weave a tapestry of engagement that electrified the room. His excitement surged as he sensed others connecting with the insights. This window of recognition fostered an unspoken alliance among them, breathing life into the sterile boardroom space, transforming it into a realm of collaboration. But as he touched upon a particularly vulnerable chapter in his evolution, a voice from the back cut through the camaraderie like a cold blast of air. It was the same stakeholder who had challenged him before. "I appreciate the personal angle, but don't you think it dilutes our focus? We need concise projections, not stories." Instantly, Jake felt the blood rush to his face. The tension that had come from opening up produced a flicker of dread, the coldness of criticism seized him. Yet, before he could spiral into reflexive guard, he recalled Hannah's words. "Thank you for the feedback," he replied. "But let me ask you this, have you ever felt a disconnect between numbers and the people those numbers represent?" This challenge galvanized the room, igniting an internal conflict. Could he truly shift the narrative and reclaim his voice against established expectations? As he navigated the ebb and flow of the discussion, Jake realized that the very essence of his growth lay not just in defending his narrative, but in inviting diverse perspectives into the conversation. As the meeting reached its conclusion, Jake stepped back, acutely aware of the hurdles ahead. The road to acceptance required more than resilience, it demanded adaptability amid opposition to discover his true potential. Walking out of the conference room, a fresh wave of anxiety gripped him once more. He had braved aspects of his identity, but in challenging the pushback, was he potentially welcoming deeper conflicts? The realization dawned he was not just fighting for recognition in his role but battling for authenticity in a landscape where vulnerability often met with resistance. With every step toward his desk, questions loomed once more. How far was he willing to go to maintain this evolutionary momentum, and what would it cost him when the tides of uncertainty hit once more? Days rolled into weeks, and Jake remained immersed in his new role. Each conference brought forth discussions that demanded not only confidence but agility, as he grappled with building a lasting change within the corporate framework. Vulnerability became his silent ally, infusing every meeting with authenticity, while the lure of pushback loomed ominously. At a team workshop, Jake pinned a vision board to the wall, before a mixed audience of executives and peers. It was an expression of ideals, a tapestry woven from stories, insights, and a collaboration powered by the human spirit. As he unfolded his ideas on inclusive design, there was an unmistakable shift in the room. Skeptical faces softened, nods grew more frequent. The atmosphere transformed, lively discussions sparked as colleagues began sharing their experiences, and Jake felt the electric thrill of shared purpose. Each conversation bore fresh fruit, a synergy of voices that echoed resilience throughout Jake's journey. But as he reveled in these connections, a looming question haunted him: would this collaborative spirit endure? A week later, Jake received an email from Evelyn, setting a date to review the progress of his inclusive design initiative. Excitement trembled beneath his professional exterior, for within him, the very core of his idea radiated a warmth fueled by shared experiences. Maintaining a solid connection now felt vital. Could this possibly mark a turning point? He wondered, equal parts thrilled and apprehensive. The day of the meeting arrived, suffused with a palpable energy that coursed through Jake. As he entered the conference room, memories flooded back. Previous meetings weighed down by self-doubt transformed into a campaign for change. The juxtaposition galvanized him as he glanced at Evelyn, seated at the head of the table, a small smile suggesting her approval. He began navigating through his presentation, weaving metrics and stories into a compelling narrative. Eyeing Evelyn, he saw a glimmer of acknowledgement as he articulated the impact of shared stories on the acceptance of his initiative. After presenting the engagement strategy and its outcomes, he felt a wave of collective energy rise. Yet, just as the conversation was about to pivot toward triumph, a familiar voice broke through. "But Jake, how sustainable is it? Can we genuinely commit resources to every individual narrative?" Jake exhaled, grounding himself in this very moment, the moment that would determine if he would retreat to his old fears or step into a new realm of authenticity. What we're discussing isn't just resource allocation, it's a commitment to cultivate a culture that values every narrative. When we ignite change through connection, we foster innovation that can endure. Awkward silence blanketed the room. Would this be his moment of downfall? Then, to his surprise, he witnessed Evelyn lean in closer with a spark in her eye, seemingly ready to endorse this shift. Jake's argument resonates. If we maintain the essence of humanity in our focus, we create a more inclusive work environment. Investors and clients are increasingly prioritizing empathetic engagement, she stated with compelling authority. The back-and-forth burgeoned into robust dialogue, inspiring ideas culminated in a unified vision, and at that moment, Jake understood their collective accountability had fractured barriers once imposed by hierarchy and expectation. Upon concluding the meeting, Jake felt an exhilarating mix of satisfaction and conviction. The air hummed with collaboration, transforming skepticism into possibility. He realized he had navigated the tumultuous waters of corporate politics, emerging triumphant. Weeks morphed into months, and the once looming insecurities faded, replaced with tangible progress. The project flourished into a comprehensive strategy. Metrics unveiled resounding engagement results, fueling further investment and support from executives. Even more impressively, colleagues began pursuing inclusive initiatives in their own areas, cascading a fresh ethos throughout the company. As he returned home one evening, he found Lily at her drawing table. Kneeling beside her, he could see the joy radiating from her fingertips as she colored life into her latest project. "Daddy, look!" she exclaimed, proudly presenting a drawing of a playground filled with children of all abilities. Her innocent insight pierced through him, and he was reminded that he was building a foundation not just for his daughter but for countless others too. "Lily, this is amazing," Jake said, the weight of pride swelling in his heart. Seizing a moment of reflection, he took a deep breath, finally confronting the truth that echoed throughout his transformative journey. He had not only achieved professional recognition but conquered the internal landscape that had once stifled his voice. Standing there, he embraced the fulfillment that sprouted from the intersection of bravery and authenticity. Jake recognized that every story shared, every connection forged contributed to a larger narrative rich with promise. It was a journey cultivated through vulnerability, sparking awareness in a domain that needed it most. With fervent resolve grounded in the belief that his actions could indeed foster change, he radiated solid confidence, living as not just an advocate for Lily but for all voices that were longing to be heard within the corporate sphere. This was his moment, the culmination of hard work, reflections, and personal growth knitted into a future where every child would have their voice echoed with equal resonance. Now, it is your turn to embark on your personal journey of growth. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and show your support. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending. We want to hear from you. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Don't wait even one more second to share. Real change starts with you.